Plato's Republic. Every book explained. Tonight, we are going to take a long, unhurried journey through one of the greatest works of philosophy ever written, Plato's Republic. All 10 books, from beginning to end. There is no rush. There is nowhere else you need to be. Let yourself settle in. Let the words wash over you. And if you drift off along the way, that is perfectly fine. The ideas will still be here, moving gently through the night. The Republic was written around 375 BCE in ancient Athens by a man named Plato, who was himself a student of Socrates. It is a dialogue, meaning it takes the form of a conversation. Socrates is the main speaker, and he talks with a group of friends and acquaintances about the most fundamental question a person can ask. What is justice? What does it mean to live a good life? What kind of society would truly be worth living in? Plato was born around 428 BCE into one of Athens's most distinguished aristocratic families. His early life was shaped by the turbulence of the Peloponnesian War, the devastating conflict between Athens and Sparta that lasted nearly 3 decades and left Athens diminished and humbled. He grew up watching democracy convulse, watching leaders rise and fall, watching the city he loved make terrible decisions. And then, in 399 BCE, when Plato was about 29 years old, the city of Athens executed his teacher Socrates on charges of impiety and corrupting the youth. That event, more than any other, shaped everything Plato would go on to write. The death of Socrates haunts the Republic like a shadow. When Socrates talks about the philosopher who returns to the cave and is killed by the prisoners, Plato is thinking of what happened to his own teacher. When he argues that philosophers must rule if justice is ever to be achieved, he is thinking of a city that was so confused, so corrupt in its values that it killed the wisest man among them. So the Republic is not just an abstract exercise in political theory. It is born from grief, from outrage, from the urgent conviction that something has gone terribly wrong with the way human beings organize their common life. And it is also born from hope, from the belief that it is possible, at least in thought, to envision a genuinely just community, and that the act of envisioning it is itself transformative. The setting is simple. Socrates has gone down to the Piraeus, the port of Athens, to attend a festival. He is on his way home when he is stopped by a group of men who persuade him to stay and talk. They gather at the home of a wealthy old man named Cephalus, and there, in the warm evening light, the conversation begins. It will stretch on through the entire night, and by the time it ends, they will have built an entire city in speech, explored the nature of the human soul, and confronted the deepest mysteries of reality itself. This is not a simple book. It is vast and layered, and philosophers have spent more than 2,000 years trying to understand everything it contains. Aristotle studied it. Cicero adapted it for Roman audiences. The early Christians read it and found in it echoes of their own theology. The Islamic philosophers of the medieval world, Al-Farabi and Averroes, wrote commentaries on it. The Renaissance humanists revered it. The German idealists wrestled with it. And today, in university classrooms and in late-night conversations, and perhaps in quiet moments like this one, the Republic continues to provoke, to challenge, and to inspire. But we do not need to master it all tonight. We are simply going to walk through it, slowly, and let the ideas settle where they may. The Republic matters because it asks the questions that never go away. Every generation, every civilization, every person who has ever stayed up late, wondering whether life is fair, whether goodness is real, whether the world could be better than it is, has been asking the same questions that Socrates and his friends ask on this night in ancient Athens. And Plato does not give easy answers. He gives us something harder and more beautiful. He gives us a way of thinking about these questions that transforms the person who engages with them. So let us begin. Let us go down to the Piraeus with Socrates and see what happens when a group of thoughtful people try, honestly and seriously, to figure out what justice really is. And as we begin, let yourself relax into the rhythm of the conversation. There is no test at the end. There is nothing you need to remember. The ideas will come and go, like waves on a shore, and some of them will leave traces in the sand. That is enough. Philosophy is not a race, it is a walk. And tonight, we are walking slowly. Before we enter the conversation itself, it is worth pausing for a moment to appreciate the literary form of the Republic. Plato did not write treatises. He did not lay out his ideas in numbered propositions or systematic chapters. He wrote dialogues, conversations between real people, with all the hesitation, humor, frustration, and sudden insight that real conversations contain. This is not an accident. For Plato, philosophy is not a body of doctrine to be memorized. It is a living activity, something that happens between people, something that changes the participants as it unfolds. When you read the Republic, or when you listen to it as you are listening now, you are not just receiving information, you are being drawn into a conversation. The questions that Socrates asks are being asked of you too. The confusions that his companions feel are confusions you might feel. And the moments of clarity, when something suddenly makes sense, those moments are available to you as well. There is one more thing worth saying about the form of the dialogue. Plato never appears as a character in any of his works. He is always behind the scenes, orchestrating the conversation, choosing what Socrates says, and what his interlocutors reply. This means that we can never be entirely sure which views are Plato's own and which are simply part of the dramatic fabric. Some scholars believe that Socrates in the Republic speaks for Plato. Others believe that Plato is using Socrates as a vehicle for ideas that go beyond what the historical Socrates actually taught. This ambiguity is part of what makes the Republic endlessly fascinating. It is a work that invites interpretation, that resists being pinned down, that seems to change each time you return to it. There is something else worth noting about the Republic before we begin. The Greek title is politeia, which means something like constitution or regime or political order. It is about justice, yes, but it is also about how communities organize themselves, about the relationship between the individual and the city, about what kind of society would genuinely allow human beings to flourish. It is at once a work of ethics, political philosophy, metaphysics, epistemology, psychology, and aesthetics. There is almost no branch of philosophy that the Republic does not touch, and yet, for all its intellectual ambition, it remains a deeply human work. The characters are vivid and distinct. The old man Cephalus, comfortable and pious, his eager son Polemarchus, the fierce and blustering Thrasymachus, the thoughtful brothers Glaucon and Adimantus, who are in real life Plato's own brothers. These are not abstract figures. They are people with temperaments and motivations and blind spots, gathered together on a warm evening to talk about the things that matter most. At book one, what is justice? Take a breath. Let yourself settle deeper into wherever you are. We are about to enter the conversation itself. And like all the best conversations, it begins quietly, almost casually, in a way that gives no hint of the vast territories it will eventually explore. The conversation begins, as so many important conversations do, almost by accident. Socrates has been to see the festival, and he is heading home when Polemarchus, the son of Cephalus, sends a slave running after him to ask him to wait. Polemarchus catches up, along with a few others, and they convince Socrates to come to his father's house. There will be a torch race on horseback later, and dinner, and good company. Socrates agrees. When they arrive, they find Cephalus, the old man, sitting in the courtyard. He has just been making a sacrifice. He is elderly now, and he does not go out much anymore. He is glad to see Socrates and tells him that as a man grows older, the pleasures of the body fade, but the pleasures of conversation grow. Old age, he says, is peaceful for a man who has lived temperately. It is not old age itself that makes people miserable, but the character of the person who grows old. This is a lovely and important observation, and it sets the tone for everything that follows. Cephalus is saying that the quality of a life depends not on external circumstances, but on the inner disposition of the person living it. Some old men rage against the loss of their youth. They complain about their bodies, their diminished pleasures, the indignities of aging. But Cephalus cites the example of the poet Sophocles, who, when asked whether he still enjoyed the pleasures of love in his old age, replied that he was glad to have escaped them, like a slave who has escaped a mad and cruel master. The desires of the body, when they finally release their grip, leave behind a great peace and freedom. This is something that only comes with age, and only to those who have the right temperament to appreciate it. Socrates, being Socrates, gently steers the conversation toward a deeper question. He asks Cephalus what he considers to be the greatest benefit of having been wealthy. And Cephalus gives an answer that turns out to be more important than it first appears. He says that the best thing about having money is that it allows a man to be honest. A wealthy man does not need to cheat anyone or leave debts unpaid. He can leave this life without fear, knowing that he owes nothing to any god or any person. This is interesting because Cephalus is essentially offering a definition of justice without quite realizing it. For him, justice means something like telling the truth and paying your debts, living honestly, dealing fairly, meeting your obligations. There is a quiet wisdom in this view, even though Socrates will soon show its limitations. Cephalus represents a certain kind of good life, the life of the decent, prosperous citizen who has done his best and expects to be treated fairly in return. He is not a philosopher, but he is not a fool either. He has lived long enough to know that peace of mind matters more than wealth, and that a clear conscience is worth more than gold. His is the wisdom of experience, of a life lived well enough by conventional standards. Socrates, with his characteristic gentleness, wonders aloud whether this definition really holds up. Is justice simply a matter of telling the truth and returning what you owe? He offers a simple example. Suppose a friend lends you a weapon, and then comes back to ask for it while he is in a state of madness. Would it be just to return the weapon to him? Most people would say no. It would be dangerous, perhaps even cruel, to put a weapon in the hands of a madman, even if the weapon technically belongs to him. Cephalus laughs and agrees, and at this point he politely excuses himself to go finish his sacrifice. He hands the conversation over to his son, Polemarchus, who picks up the argument eagerly. This moment is worth noting. Cephalus is a good and decent man, but he is not the type to examine his beliefs too deeply. He has lived well, he has a comfortable definition of justice, and he is content to leave it at that. Polemarchus, younger and more spirited, is willing to push further. Polemarchus takes up the definition with a refinement. He cites the poet Simonides, who said that justice is giving to each person what is owed to them, but Polemarchus interprets this in a particular way. He believes that what is owed to friends is good, and what is owed to enemies is harm. Justice, on this view, is helping your friends and harming your enemies. This is a very common view, not just in ancient Greece, but in many cultures throughout history. It has an intuitive appeal. We feel that good people deserve to be treated well, and that bad people deserve to be treated poorly. Loyalty to friends and toughness toward enemies seems like a reasonable moral code. But Socrates, step by step, shows that this view has serious problems. First, he asks, how do we know who our real friends are? People are often mistaken about who is truly good and who is truly bad. We sometimes think someone is our friend when in fact they are not, and we sometimes think someone is our enemy when in fact they are a good person we have simply misjudged. If justice means helping friends and harming enemies, and we get confused about which is which, then we might end up helping bad people and harming good ones. That does not sound very just at all. And then Socrates raises an even deeper objection. He suggests that it can never be just to harm anyone at all. His reasoning is elegant. When you harm a horse, you make it a worse horse. When you harm a dog, you make it a worse dog. Harm always makes its object worse with respect to its own proper excellence. So when you harm a human being, you make them worse as a human being, which is to say, you make them less just. But if justice is a kind of excellence or virtue, then the just person, by acting justly, could never make another person less just. That would be like saying that heat makes things cold, or that a good musician makes people less musical by practicing music. It is a contradiction, so justice cannot mean harming anyone. This is a remarkable conclusion, and it overturns one of the most common moral assumptions of the ancient world. Socrates is suggesting that the truly just person does good even to those who have done them wrong. This idea, which will reappear in various forms throughout the history of philosophy and religion, is here planted like a seed in the first book of the Republic. It is worth noting how radical this is in context. The Greek moral tradition was deeply shaped by the principle of helping friends and harming enemies. The heroes of Homer live by this code. Achilles rages against his enemies and is fiercely loyal to his companions. Odysseus is cunning in defeating those who oppose him. The whole fabric of Greek aristocratic ethics is woven from this thread, and here is Socrates quietly pulling it loose. He is saying that the highest kind of human being does not harm anyone, ever. That justice is a creative force, not a destructive one. That the just person improves the world simply by being just. Centuries later, this same idea would appear in the teachings of Jesus, in the Stoic philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, in the nonviolent resistance of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. But here, in this quiet evening conversation in the Piraeus, it appears for the first time in Western philosophy, almost as an aside, a logical consequence of the argument that Socrates barely seems to notice he has made. Let that idea sit with you for a moment. Justice never harms. The just person, simply by being just, makes the world better, never worse. This is not how most people think about justice. Most people think of justice as punishing the wicked, as giving people what they deserve, including punishment. But Socrates is moving toward a different understanding entirely. For him, justice is a kind of perfection, an excellence of the soul that radiates outward, making everything it touches better. It is more like sunlight than like a sword. Polemarchus does not have a good response to this, and the conversation might have ended gently there, except that a new voice enters. Thrasymachus, a sophist and teacher of rhetoric, has been growing increasingly agitated as he listens to Socrates. He thinks the whole discussion has been naive and ridiculous. Finally, he can contain himself no longer, and he bursts into the conversation like a wild animal, as Plato memorably describes it. Thrasymachus offers a very different definition of justice. Justice, he says, is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger. What people call justice is simply whatever benefits those in power. In every city, the ruling group makes the laws to suit its own interests. In a democracy, the democratic majority passes laws that benefit the majority. In a tyranny, the tyrant passes laws that benefit himself. And then they call obedience to those laws justice. So justice is not some noble ideal, it is just a pretty word for the power of the strong to dominate the weak. Pause for a moment and feel the weight of this claim. Thrasymachus is not making a minor point about legal technicalities. He is attacking the very foundation of morality. He is saying that all the noble talk about right and wrong, about fairness and goodness, is a facade. Behind the facade, there is only power. The strong take what they can, the weak suffer what they must. And the language of justice is simply the dressing that the strong put on their dominance to make it look respectable. This is a worldview that many people secretly hold, even if they would never say it so bluntly. When someone cuts in line and no one stops them, when a corporation pollutes a river and pays a small fine, when a government invades a weaker country and calls it liberation, the voice of Thrasymachus whispers in the background. Maybe this is how the world really works. Maybe justice is just a story the powerful tell to keep the rest of us in line. This is a powerful challenge, and it has echoes throughout the history of political thought. Nearly 2.5 millennia later, we still wrestle with exactly this question. Thrasymachus is essentially saying that morality is an illusion, a tool of the powerful. The strong make the rules, the weak follow them, and the strong dress this up in the language of justice to make it seem legitimate. In our own time, many thinkers have said similar things. The idea that morality is really about power, that what we call right and wrong is just a reflection of who has the upper hand, is one of the most persistent and troubling ideas in human thought. Socrates takes Thrasymachus seriously, as he takes all serious interlocutors. He begins, as always, by asking questions, trying to find the precise shape of the claim so that he can examine it properly. First, Socrates raises a practical difficulty. If justice is whatever the stronger party decrees, what happens when the rulers make a mistake? Suppose a tyrant, thinking that a certain policy will benefit him, actually passes a law that harms his own interests. The citizens, being just on Thrasymachus' definition, would obey this law, but in doing so, they would be acting against the advantage of the stronger. So justice would be both the advantage and the disadvantage of the stronger at the same time. This is a contradiction. Thrasymachus tries to escape this by saying that a true ruler, in the strict sense of the word, never makes mistakes. A ruler who errs is not, at that moment, truly ruling. This is like saying that a doctor who prescribes the wrong treatment is not, at that moment, truly a doctor. This is an important move because it shifts the argument from what rulers actually do to what a ruler in the ideal sense really is. And Socrates presses on this point. He suggests that if we think about what a ruler really is, in the strict sense, we find something surprising. Every art or craft aims at the benefit not of the practitioner, but of the object of the art. Medicine aims at the health of the patient, not the wealth of the doctor. Navigation aims at the safety of the sailors, not the comfort of the captain. And ruling, as an art, aims at the benefit of the ruled, not the benefit of the ruler. This is a direct inversion of Thrasymachus' claim. Where Thrasymachus said that justice is the advantage of the stronger, Socrates is suggesting that true ruling is actually directed toward the advantage of the weaker. The genuine ruler, the one who truly deserves the name, is not someone who exploits the people, but someone who serves them. Think about how profound this is. The entire modern concept of public service, of elected officials who serve the people, of government as a trust held on behalf of citizens, has its roots in this moment. Socrates is articulating the idea that legitimate authority is always exercised for the benefit of those over whom it is exercised. A parent who exploits their child is not truly a parent. A doctor who harms their patient is not truly a doctor. And a ruler who exploits the citizens is not truly a ruler. They are something else entirely. They are a tyrant wearing the costume of a king. Thrasymachus pushes back with a vivid analogy. He compares the unjust person to a shepherd, but not the kind of shepherd who cares for his flock. No, the shepherd that Thrasymachus has in mind is one who fattens the sheep for his own benefit, for the feast, for the sale, for the shearing. The unjust person, Thrasymachus argues, always comes out ahead. In business, in politics, in every arena of life, the person who is willing to cheat, steal, and deceive ends up with more than the person who plays fair. And the greatest example of this is the tyrant, who seizes an entire city for himself. People call small-time cheaters criminals, but when someone steals an entire nation, they call him blessed and happy. This is the challenge that will drive the entire republic. Thrasymachus is saying, in effect, that injustice pays, that the unjust life is better than the just life, that the person who has no scruples, who takes what he wants by force or cunning, lives a richer, freer, happier life than the person who constrains himself by moral rules. And if you are honest with yourself, you have probably felt the pull of this argument at some point in your life. When you see someone cheat and prosper, when you see someone honest and kind get taken advantage of, when you watch the news and see that the powerful seem to get away with everything while ordinary people bear the consequences. In those moments, the voice of Thrasymachus speaks, and it says, "Why bother being good? What is the point of playing by the rules if the rules are rigged?" The entire rest of the Republic is Plato's answer to that voice. And it is an answer that takes the question with the utmost seriousness. Plato does not dismiss Thrasymachus as a cynic or a fool. He treats the challenge as the most important challenge there is, because if Thrasymachus is right, then morality is an illusion. And the wise person is the person who sees through the illusion and acts accordingly. Everything depends on whether this challenge can be met. Socrates responds with several arguments, each of which chips away at Thrasymachus' position. He points out that the unjust person tries to outdo everyone, both the just and the unjust, whereas the just person only tries to outdo the unjust. In every other area of expertise, the skilled person does not try to outdo other skilled people. A good musician does not try to tune a string higher than another good musician would tune it. Only the ignorant person, who does not know what the right tuning is, tries to outdo everyone. So injustice seems to be a form of ignorance, not wisdom. He also argues that injustice produces discord and hatred, while justice produces harmony and friendship. A group of unjust people cannot accomplish anything together because they would constantly be cheating and undermining one another. Even a gang of thieves needs some justice among its members to function. Injustice, taken to its extreme, destroys the capacity for effective action. This is a remarkably practical argument. Socrates is pointing out that injustice is self-defeating. A completely unjust person could not even cooperate with themselves because the different parts of their soul would be in constant conflict. The unjust person is like a committee in which every member is trying to cheat every other member. Nothing gets done. The soul fragments. The person becomes incapable of sustained, purposeful action. They may appear powerful from the outside, but inside, they are chaos. Finally, Socrates introduces the idea that everything has its own proper function and its own proper excellence. The function of the eyes is to see, and the excellence of the eyes is good vision. The function of a pruning knife is to cut, and its excellence is sharpness. What then is the function of the soul? Socrates suggests that the soul's function is to live, to manage, to deliberate, to take care of things. And the excellence of the soul is justice. So the just soul lives well, and the unjust soul lives badly. The just person is happy, and the unjust person is miserable. Thrasymachus is not fully convinced, but he is worn down. He grudgingly goes along with the conclusions, and the first book ends. But Socrates himself is dissatisfied. He says that they have been jumping from one question to another without ever properly answering the first one. They still do not really know what justice is. They have only been arguing about whether it is profitable. And you cannot know whether something is profitable until you know what it is. This admission of failure is one of the most characteristic and most admirable features of Socratic philosophy. Socrates does not pretend to have won the argument. He does not claim victory. He says honestly that they have gone about things in the wrong order, and that the real work still lies ahead. There is a deep humility in this, a willingness to acknowledge the limits of what has been achieved, that stands in sharp contrast to the bluster of Thrasymachus. The sophist claims to know everything. The philosopher admits that he knows almost nothing. And paradoxically, it is the philosopher's admission of ignorance that opens the door to genuine understanding. This dissatisfaction is important. Book 1 of the Republic is sometimes read as a kind of prologue, a clearing of the ground. Socrates has examined and refuted several popular definitions of justice, but he has not yet offered his own. The real argument is about to begin, prompted by one of the most important challenges in all of philosophy. So let us pause here and take stock of where we are. 3 definitions of justice have been offered and found wanting. Cephalus said justice is telling the truth and paying your debts. Polemarchus said justice is helping friends and harming enemies. Thrasymachus said justice is the advantage of the stronger. Each definition captured something real about how people think about justice, but each fell apart under examination. What is left? A sense that justice must be something deeper and more fundamental than any of these views, something that cannot be reduced to convention or self-interest or the power of the strong. Socrates does not yet know what this something is, but he knows that the search must continue, and it will, with renewed urgency, in Book 2. If you have been drifting in and out, that is completely fine. The Republic is a work that rewards many visits. Each time you return to it, you notice something new. For now, just know that the ground has been cleared, the easy answers have been swept away, and the hard, beautiful, transformative work of the dialogue is about to begin. There is a pattern in Book 1 that is worth noticing because it recurs throughout the Republic and throughout all of Plato's dialogues. Each definition of justice that is offered captures something true but turns out to be incomplete. Cephalus is right that honesty matters. Polemarchus is right that we have special obligations to those we care about, Even Thrasymachus is right that power distorts the meaning of justice. But none of them has the full picture. Each sees a part of the elephant, as the old parable goes, but none sees the whole. Socrates' genius is not that he has the answer ready-made. It is that he knows how to show each person the limits of their own view, gently, persistently, and with a kind of love. He is not trying to win arguments, he is trying to lead people toward a truth that is bigger than any of them. And that is what we are about to see on a much larger scale as the dialogue continues. Book 2, The Challenge of Glaucon and Adeimantus. Book 2 opens with a moment that changes everything. Socrates thinks the conversation might be winding down, but Glaucon, Plato's own brother, is not satisfied. He wants to hear justice praised properly, not just defended against attack. And so he poses a challenge that is breathtaking in its honesty and its force. Glaucon begins by dividing all good things into 3 classes. First, there are things we value for their own sake, simply because they are pleasant or beautiful. The enjoyment of a harmless pleasure, for instance, is good in itself, regardless of any consequences. Second, there are things we value both for their own sake and for their consequences. Health is like this. We enjoy being healthy, and we also value health because of all the things it enables us to do. Third, there are things we value only for their consequences, not because they are enjoyable in themselves. Exercise, taking medicine, going to work. These things may be unpleasant, but we do them because they lead to good results. Glaucon says that most people put justice in the 3rd category. They do not think justice is enjoyable in itself. They think it is a burden, something unpleasant that we tolerate because of the consequences. We act justly because we fear punishment, because we want a good reputation, because we need to get along with others. But if we could get all those benefits without actually being just, most people would choose injustice in a heartbeat. Socrates says that he believes justice belongs in the 2nd category. It is good both in itself and for its consequences. And Glaucon says, wonderful, then prove it. Show us that justice is good for the just person's own soul, regardless of any external rewards or punishments. Show us that the just person is happier than the unjust person, even if the just person gets none of the rewards of justice and the unjust person gets all of them. To sharpen this challenge, Glaucon tells the famous story of the Ring of Gyges. According to the legend, Gyges was a shepherd in the service of the king of Lydia. One day, after a great earthquake, a chasm opened in the ground near where he was tending his flock. He went down into it and discovered a hollow bronze horse with a corpse inside, wearing a gold ring. He took the ring, and he discovered that when he turned the setting inward, he became invisible. When he turned it outward, he became visible again. With this power, Gyges went to the palace, seduced the queen, murdered the king, and took over the kingdom. The point of the story is simple and devastating. If you could be invisible, if you could do anything you wanted with absolutely no consequences, would you still be just? Glaucon suggests that most people would not. And if that is true, then justice is not something people value for itself. It is just a constraint imposed by fear. This thought experiment has lost none of its force in 2.5 millennia. In our own time, we might think of it in terms of anonymity on the internet, where people often behave in ways they would never behave face to face, or in terms of the behavior of those who suddenly find themselves in positions of unchecked power. The Ring of Gyges is any situation in which accountability disappears. And the question Glaucon is asking is whether morality survives the removal of consequences. If you could cheat without being caught, steal without being seen, lie without being discovered, would you? And if you would, then what does that say about your so-called justice? Glaucon goes even further. He asks Socrates to imagine 2 people. The first is perfectly unjust, but has the reputation of being perfectly just. He has managed to deceive everyone. He is wealthy, honored, successful, and beloved, all while being thoroughly unjust in secret. The second person is perfectly just, but has the reputation of being perfectly unjust. Everyone thinks he is a terrible person. He is punished, scorned, impoverished, and eventually tortured and killed, all while being genuinely just in his soul. Now Glaucon says, tell us which of these two people is happier. If justice is truly good in itself, then the just person should be happier even in these extreme conditions. If you can show us that, then you will have truly defended justice. This thought experiment is extraordinary in its rigor and its honesty. Glaucon is not trying to defeat Socrates. He is not a cynic. He genuinely wants to hear justice defended properly. He loves justice and wants to believe that it is worth pursuing for its own sake, but he will not be satisfied with cheap arguments or emotional appeals. He wants the real thing, a demonstration that justice, stripped of every external advantage, is still better than injustice dressed in every external reward. It is worth noting how rare this kind of intellectual honesty is. Most people defend justice with a vague gesture toward rewards and punishments. Be good and good things will happen to you. Be bad and you will be punished. But Glaucon sees through this. He knows that in the real world, the unjust often prosper and the just often suffer. If justice can only be defended by promising rewards, then it is not really justice that we value, but the rewards. And that means Thrasymachus was right all along, and morality is just a game of self-interest dressed up in noble language. Glaucon's brother, Adeimantus, adds another layer to the challenge. He points out that even the people who praise justice usually do so for the wrong reasons. They praise justice because it brings good reputation, success, and rewards from the gods. They do not praise justice for what it does to the soul itself. And the poets and priests are even worse. They say that the gods can be bribed with sacrifices and rituals so that even if you are unjust, you can buy your way out of divine punishment. When children hear this, they naturally conclude that the smart thing to do is to appear just while actually being unjust, and then to bribe the gods for good measure. Adeimantus asks Socrates to set aside all the external rewards and punishments of justice and injustice, all the reputations and consequences, and to look only at what justice and injustice do to the soul of the person who possesses them. Show us that justice makes the soul healthy and injustice makes it sick, regardless of whether anyone ever finds out. This is the challenge that drives the entire rest of the Republic. It is one of the most important challenges in the history of ethics. And Socrates, rather than answering it directly, proposes an ingenious method. He suggests that justice exists not only in individual persons but also in whole cities. And since a city is larger than a person, it might be easier to see justice in the city first, and then to look for the same pattern in the individual soul. It is like trying to read small letters. If the same letters are written somewhere in large print, it makes sense to read the large letters first, and then to go back and check the small ones. And so they begin to build a city in speech, not a real city, but an imagined one, constructed step by step from first principles, so that they can see where justice arises and what it looks like. This method is one of the most remarkable things about the Republic. Instead of trying to define justice directly, Socrates proposes to watch it come into being. He will construct a community from scratch, adding elements one by one, and at each stage they will ask, has justice appeared yet? It is like watching a photograph develop in a dark room, slowly, detail by detail, until the full picture emerges. There is a deeper significance to this method that is easy to miss. By building a city from scratch, Socrates is also revealing something about human nature. The city does not exist independently of the human beings who compose it. It arises from human needs and human capacities. So the structure of the city tells us something about the structure of the soul. The city is a mirror of the soul writ large, and the soul is a mirror of the city writ small. This correspondence between city and soul is the great architectural principle of the entire Republic, and everything that follows depends on it. The first city they imagine is very simple. It arises from necessity. No person is self-sufficient. We all need food, shelter, clothing, and other basic goods. And so people come together, each contributing their own particular skill. One person farms, another builds, another weaves. The principle that governs this city is specialization. Each person does the one thing they are best suited for, and they exchange goods and services with one another. This is the most efficient arrangement. because people who specialize at one task become much better at it than people who try to do everything themselves. This first city is modest and peaceful. The people eat simple food, drink moderate amounts of wine, make love, and live contentedly within their means. They are healthy and they live to a good old age. There is enough for everyone. Socrates seems to think well of this city. But Glaucon objects. He calls it a city of pigs. Where are the luxuries, the couches, the fine foods, the arts? Real human beings want more than just bare necessities. They want comfort, beauty, pleasure, variety. This objection is interesting because it reveals something about Glaucon's character, and, Plato seems to suggest, about human nature in general. The simple city is perfectly functional. Everyone has what they need. There is no war, no conflict, no exploitation. But it is boring. It lacks the spark of ambition, creativity, and desire that makes human life distinctly human. Glaucon is not wrong. A city without art, without refinement, without aspiration, may be peaceful, but it is not fully human. And yet Socrates seems almost wistful about this simple city, as if part of him recognizes that the complications that make human life rich are also the complications that make it dangerous. Socrates agrees to expand the city, but he notes pointedly that they are now moving from a healthy city to an inflamed or feverish one. The addition of luxuries means the city will need more land, more resources, and more people. Perfumers, poets, actors, tutors, servants, swineherds, and all sorts of other specialists will be needed. And because the city needs more territory, it will inevitably come into conflict with neighboring cities, and that means the city will need an army. This is a crucial turning point. The need for defense introduces an entirely new class of people into the city. Socrates calls them guardians, or sometimes warriors. Their job is to protect the city from external enemies and to maintain internal order. And just as the principle of specialization means that a farmer should farm and a builder should build, it also means that a guardian should do nothing but guard. The art of war is too complex and too important to be left to amateurs. But what sort of people should the guardians be? Socrates says they need a particular combination of qualities that seems almost contradictory. They need to be fierce and courageous in the face of enemies, but gentle and friendly toward their fellow citizens. They need to be strong and spirited, but also philosophical, meaning they need to love wisdom and be capable of distinguishing friend from foe, familiar from foreign. Socrates compares them to well-bred dogs who are gentle with people they know and aggressive towards strangers. And he notes that the quality that makes a good dog, the ability to distinguish the known from the unknown, is actually a form of love of learning. The dog treats the known person well because the known is familiar, and it treats the stranger with suspicion because the stranger is unknown. In a rough way, this is the beginning of philosophy. The love of the known, the desire to understand and to distinguish truth from falsehood. This is a charming and somewhat surprising analogy, but it points to something important. For Plato, the love of wisdom is not an exotic or specialized trait. It is a natural extension of something that exists in even the simplest creatures, the ability to distinguish friend from foe, the familiar from the unfamiliar. Philosophy in its highest form is the perfection of this natural capacity. The philosopher is someone who has trained the ability to distinguish reality from appearance, truth from falsehood, the genuine from the counterfeit, to its highest possible level. In a sense, the philosopher is simply the best trained version of a very ordinary capacity. And with this observation, the question of how to educate the guardians becomes central. If the guardians are to protect the city wisely and well, they must be educated properly. Their souls must be shaped in the right way from the very beginning. And so the discussion turns to education, which will occupy the next 2 books. The city in speech is taking shape. It has producers who provide for material needs, and it has guardians who protect it. Soon it will have rulers who govern it. And the relationships among these groups, the way each class does its own proper work and does not interfere with the work of the others, will turn out to be the very thing that Socrates calls justice. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. For now, the challenge has been set. Glaucon and Adeimantus want to know whether justice is good for the soul in itself. Socrates has proposed building a city in speech to find the answer, and the city is beginning to take form. Let us pause here for a moment. If you have been following along, you now have the basic framework of the Republic in mind. The question is whether justice is good for the soul in itself. The method is to build a city in speech and look for justice in it. The first city, the simple one, has been set aside as too austere. The second city, the luxurious one, requires guardians. And the guardians require education. Everything follows from everything else, like links in a chain, each step arising naturally from the one before. This is one of the pleasures of reading Plato. The argument unfolds with a kind of organic inevitability. You start with a simple question: what is justice? And before you know it, you are talking about education, poetry, music, the nature of the soul, the structure of reality, and the fate of civilizations. Everything connects. And the deeper you go, the more you see how the pieces fit together. Now to Book 3. Education, music, and the censorship of poetry. The education of the guardians is treated with extraordinary care and detail. For Plato, education is not simply a matter of transmitting information. It is the shaping of the soul, the stories children hear, the music they listen to, the physical training they undergo. All of these mold their characters in deep and lasting ways. A person who is raised on the right stories and the right music will grow up with a soul that naturally inclines toward what is good and beautiful, even before they have the capacity to understand why. Socrates begins with the stories that are told to children. In ancient Greece, the primary source of stories was the poetry of Homer and Hesiod, the great myths about gods and heroes that every Greek child knew by heart. Socrates argues that many of these stories are harmful and must be censored. This is one of the most controversial aspects of the Republic, and it is worth understanding why Socrates takes this position. The problem, as Socrates sees it, is that the traditional myths depict the gods behaving badly. The gods lie, cheat, steal, fight with one another, and indulge in all sorts of shameful behavior. Zeus overthrows his own father. Hera schemes and deceives. The gods laugh at Hephaestus. They weep and mourn excessively. They change shape and disguise themselves. Socrates objects to all of this, not because he is a prude, but because he believes that the stories we absorb in childhood shape our deepest attitudes toward reality. If children are told that the gods are deceitful and quarrelsome, they will think that deceit and quarrelsomeness are acceptable. If they hear that the greatest heroes weep and wail in the face of death, they will think it is natural to fear death excessively. If they are told that the gods change shape, they will come to believe that reality itself is unstable and deceptive. Instead, Socrates proposes two fundamental theological principles that all stories about the gods must follow. First, God is the cause only of what is good, never of what is evil. When bad things happen, we must look for some other cause, not blame the divine. Second, God does not change shape or deceive. The divine nature is perfect and has no reason to alter itself, because any change from perfection would be a change for the worse. These two principles amount to a philosophical theology that is strikingly different from the popular religion of ancient Greece. The Olympian gods of Homer are passionate, jealous, vindictive, and unpredictable. They intervene in human affairs for personal reasons. They play favorites. They deceive. Socrates is proposing a God who is none of these things. A God who is perfectly good, perfectly stable, perfectly truthful. This conception of the divine would have enormous influence on later religious thought. When Christian theologians in the early centuries developed their understanding of God as absolutely good, immutable, and truthful, they were drawing, whether they knew it or not, on the principles that Socrates articulates here in Book 3 of the Republic. These principles have profound implications. They mean that the entire traditional mythology of Greece would need to be radically revised. Socrates is well aware of this, and he does not flinch from the conclusion. The stories told to children in the ideal city would be very different from the stories told in Athens. They would depict gods who are always truthful, always good, always consistent, and heroes who are brave, temperate, and dignified, even in the face of suffering and death. This extends to depictions of the afterlife as well. Socrates argues that the guardians must not be taught to fear death, because a guardian who fears death will not fight bravely. So the terrifying descriptions of Hades found in Homer, the gibbering shades, the gloomy underground, must be replaced with something less frightening. Not because Socrates necessarily knows what happens after death, but because the functional effect of fearful stories is to make people cowardly, and the city needs its guardians to be brave. The discussion of stories extends to matters of character more generally. Guardians should not hear stories about heroes giving in to excessive laughter because it encourages a lack of self-control. They should not hear stories about heroes driven mad by greed or lust. They should not hear stories that glorify luxury and excess. The ideal stories would present models of virtue, courage, self-discipline, piety, and justice. Socrates also discusses the form of storytelling, not just its content. He distinguishes between simple narration, where the poet speaks in his own voice, and imitation, where the poet speaks in the voice of a character. He is wary of imitation, especially imitation of bad characters. If a young person spends a great deal of time pretending to be a coward, or a villain, or a madman, the habit of imitation may seep into their character. The guardians should only imitate good people, if they imitate anyone at all. After stories, Socrates turns to music and the performing arts. In ancient Greece, poetry was not read silently. It was sung or chanted, accompanied by musical instruments. And different musical modes, which we might think of as something like musical keys or scales, were associated with different moods and characters. Some modes were associated with lamentation and sorrow, others with relaxation and drinking, others with courage and resolve. Socrates proposes that only those modes which promote courage and moderation should be allowed in the education of the guardians. The mournful and the dissolute modes should be eliminated. Similarly, only certain instruments should be permitted. Complex instruments with many strings and the ability to play in many different modes should be excluded in favor of simpler instruments that encourage restraint and harmony. This may seem extreme to modern ears, but the underlying principle is worth taking seriously. Socrates believes that music has a direct effect on the soul. It bypasses reason and works on the emotions and the character at a deep, almost unconscious level. A person who is immersed in graceful, harmonious music from childhood will develop a soul that naturally responds to grace and harmony in all things. They will be disgusted by ugliness and attracted to beauty. They will have a kind of instinctive moral sense, a taste for the good, even before they are old enough to understand the reasons for it. This is why Socrates says that musical education is the most important part of education. Not because music is the highest form of knowledge, but because it shapes the soul at the most fundamental level. It prepares the ground for philosophy by cultivating the right dispositions and loves. Think of it this way. Long before a child can understand arguments about why courage is better than cowardice, or why temperance is better than excess, the child can feel the difference between harmonious music and discordant music, between a graceful movement and an awkward one, between a beautiful story and an ugly one. These aesthetic responses are the earliest stirrings of moral sensibility. The child who has learned to love harmony in music will, when the time comes, recognize harmony in the soul. The child who has learned to love grace in movement will recognize grace in character. Beauty for Plato is not separate from goodness. It is the visible face of goodness, the way the good shows itself in the world of sense. This is a profound idea, and it has implications that extend far beyond the ancient world. It suggests that the arts are not just entertainment, not just decoration, but the first and most fundamental form of moral education. The culture that surrounds a child, the stories, the music, the images, the patterns of beauty and ugliness, shapes the child's soul long before any formal instruction begins. If we want to understand why people are the way they are, we need to look not just at what they were taught, but at what they were immersed in. Physical education is also discussed. But Socrates makes an interesting claim about its purpose. One might think that physical education is for the body and musical education is for the soul. But Socrates says that both are really for the soul. Physical training that is too harsh produces a person who is savage and brutal. Musical education that is too soft produces a person who is weak and effeminate. The goal is a balanced soul, one that combines gentleness with strength, courage with moderation, spirit with reason. The guardians are to live a simple, austere life. They are not to possess private property. They are not to have their own houses or their own stores of gold and silver. They are to live together, eat together, and be supported by the other citizens. The reasoning is that if the guardians have private wealth, they will begin to think of themselves as proprietors rather than protectors. They will become like wolves instead of sheepdogs. The temptations of wealth and luxury are too great. The guardians must be insulated from them entirely. This is one of the most practically challenging aspects of Plato's ideal. He is saying that the people with the most power must have the least property. This is the exact opposite of how most actual societies work, where political power and economic wealth tend to concentrate in the same hands. Plato sees this concentration as the root of political corruption. When the people who guard the city also own the city's wealth, they inevitably start governing for their own benefit rather than for the benefit of the whole. The separation of power from property is Plato's radical solution, and it is one that no actual society has ever fully implemented, though many have aspired to some version of it. Someone objects that this does not sound like a very happy life for the guardians. They are denied all the things that most people associate with happiness, wealth, property, luxury. Socrates acknowledges this, but says that the goal is not to make any one class in the city maximally happy. The goal is to make the whole city as happy as possible, and a city whose guardians are devoted to its welfare, free from the corrupting influence of wealth, is a city that is well governed and therefore good for everyone. This is an important principle. The good of the whole takes precedence over the good of any part. The guardians serve the city, not themselves. And in serving the city well, they achieve a different kind of happiness, the happiness that comes from doing what one is naturally suited to do, from living in harmony with one's own nature and with the community. At the end of Book 3, Socrates introduces one of the most controversial elements of his ideal city, the so-called noble lie, or more accurately, the noble fiction. He proposes that the citizens of the city be told a story, a myth, about their origins. The story says that all the citizens were formed in the earth, and that the God who made them mixed different metals into their souls. The rulers have gold in their souls. The guardians have silver. The farmers and craftsmen have bronze and iron. The purpose of this myth is twofold. First, it is meant to create a sense of brotherhood among the citizens. Since they were all formed from the same earth, they are all siblings regardless of their class. Second, it establishes a principle of natural hierarchy. People should be assigned to the class that matches their nature. And the most important task of the rulers is to watch carefully and see what metal is in the soul of each child. If a golden child is born to iron parents, that child should be raised to the ruling class. And if an iron child is born to golden parents, that child should be assigned to the producing class. There must be no hereditary privilege. Everything depends on the nature of the individual soul. This is troubling in many ways. The idea of a state-sponsored myth, a deliberate deception designed to maintain social order, sits uneasily with the emphasis on truth and the critique of deceptive gods that Socrates articulated just a few pages earlier. Philosophers have debated this tension endlessly. Some see the noble lie as a pragmatic concession, an acknowledgement that most people cannot be governed by reason alone and need myths and stories to sustain their commitment to the common good. Others see it as a deep flaw in Plato's vision, a sign that even the ideal city cannot entirely dispense with manipulation. Whatever we make of it, the noble lie reveals something important about Plato's thought. He takes seriously the question of how a community holds itself together. Reason alone may not be sufficient. Stories, myths, shared beliefs, these are the glue of social life, and the quality of those stories matters enormously. If you are still awake, Let yourself appreciate what has happened so far in the dialogue. We began with a simple question: what is justice? And we have been led step by step into a discussion of education, of storytelling, of music, of the very fabric of culture itself. This is characteristic of Plato. Every question, if you pursue it honestly, leads to every other question. You cannot ask what justice is without asking what kind of person is just. You cannot ask what kind of person is just without asking how people are shaped. And you cannot ask how people are shaped without asking about stories, music, physical training, and the whole environment in which a soul grows up. Philosophy for Plato is not a narrow specialty. It is the attempt to understand everything in its interconnectedness. And so, Book 3 draws to a close. The education of the guardians has been outlined, the stories they will hear, the music they will practice, the physical training they will undergo, the austere and communal life they will lead. All of these have been designed to produce souls of the right kind. Souls that are courageous but gentle, spirited but wise, strong but moderate. The city is taking shape, and it is a city built not on wealth or military power, but on education. For Plato, the foundation of a just society is not its laws, or its constitution, or its economy. It is the character of its citizens. Get the education right, and everything else follows. Get it wrong, and no amount of legislation can save you. This is a lesson that resonates across the centuries. Every society is at bottom an educational project. The stories we tell our children, the values we reward, the kinds of character we celebrate or condemn, these are the things that determine what kind of world we live in. Plato understood this with a clarity that few thinkers have matched. Macra Book 4, The Virtues of the City and Justice as Harmony of the Soul. The city in speech is now essentially complete. It has 3 classes: producers who provide for material needs, guardians or auxiliaries who protect the city, and rulers who govern it with wisdom. Each class has its own proper work, its own natural role in the life of the community. Now Socrates can begin to look for justice. He says that if the city has been founded well, it should possess all 4 of the cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice. If they can find the first 3, whatever is left over should be justice. Wisdom is found in the ruling class. It is the knowledge of how to govern the city as a whole, how to manage its internal affairs and its relations with other cities. This is not the specialized knowledge of a craftsman or a farmer. It is a comprehensive knowledge of what is best for the entire community, and it resides in the smallest class, the rulers, who are selected for their natural aptitude and trained through long years of education. Courage is found in the guardian class. But it is not just any kind of fearlessness. It is what Socrates calls civic courage, the ability to hold firm to the beliefs about what is truly fearful and what is not, that have been instilled through education. A truly courageous person is not someone who fears nothing. It is someone whose fears are properly calibrated, who fears the right things and does not fear the wrong things, and who maintains this calibration even under the pressure of pain, pleasure, desire, and fear. This is a subtle and important point. Most people think of courage as the absence of fear, but Plato's conception is richer. Courage is not fearlessness. It is the preservation of right belief in the face of pressure. The courageous person knows, through education and reflection, what is truly worth fearing and what is not. Death in battle, for instance, is not worth fearing if the cause is just, but dishonor, cowardice, betrayal of what is right, these are worth fearing. The courageous person holds on to these convictions even when every fiber of their body is screaming at them to run, to hide, to give in. This is not a natural endowment. It is an achievement of education. The soul must be trained to hold fast to its convictions, just as a fabric must be properly prepared to hold fast to its dye. Socrates compares this to the art of dyeing wool. If you want to dye wool a particular color, you must first select wool of the right natural color, white, and then prepare it carefully before applying the dye. If you do it right, the color is fast, meaning it cannot be washed out. Education is like this. It takes the naturally spirited souls of the guardians and dyes them with the right beliefs so that those beliefs are fast and cannot be washed out by the solvents of pleasure, fear, desire, and pain? Moderation or temperance is different from wisdom and courage. It is not located in any single class. Instead, it runs through the entire city. Moderation is a kind of harmony or agreement between the rulers and the ruled about who should govern. It is the willing acceptance by all classes of the natural hierarchy of the city. The producers agree that the rulers should rule. The guardians agree that the rulers should rule. And the rulers agree that they should rule. There is no conflict, no resentment, no power struggle. Everyone recognizes their place and is content with it. Moderation is perhaps the least dramatic of the four virtues, but it may be the most essential. Without moderation, the city would tear itself apart. Without the voluntary agreement of the governed, the rulers would need to use force, and a city held together by force is not a just city at all. Moderation is the virtue that makes the others possible. It is the social glue, the quiet consent that allows the whole system to function. In an individual soul, moderation is the willingness of the lower parts to be governed by the higher. It is the appetites saying, yes, reason should be in charge, I accept its authority. Without this inner consent, the soul is a battleground, and no amount of rational understanding can produce justice. And now Socrates arrives at justice itself. Justice, he says, is the principle that makes all the other virtues possible. It is the principle that each person should do their own work and not meddle in the work of others. The producer should produce, the guardian should guard, the ruler should rule. Each person does what they are naturally suited for, and no one tries to do someone else's job. This might sound like a modest definition. It is not what most people expect when they think of justice. We tend to think of justice in terms of fairness, equality, rights, punishment, and reward. But Socrates is offering something deeper. He is saying that justice is a structural principle, a principle of proper order and harmony. When each part of the whole does its own work, the whole functions well. When parts start interfering with one another, when producers try to rule, or guardians try to produce, or rulers try to fight, everything breaks down. Think of it as something like the justice of a healthy body. In a healthy body, the heart pumps blood, the lungs breathe air, the stomach digests food. Each organ does its own work. You would not say that the stomach is being oppressed because it does not get to pump blood. You would say that the stomach is fulfilling its nature, doing what it is meant to do. And the body as a whole benefits from each organ doing its own work. Sickness is what happens when organs begin to malfunction, when they fail to do their own work or interfere with the work of others. Justice, for Plato, is the health of the community. Injustice is its disease. There is something both appealing and disturbing about this vision. Appealing because it captures the intuition that a good community is one where everyone contributes according to their abilities and everyone benefits from the contributions of others. Disturbing because it seems to lock people into fixed roles and to deny the possibility of social mobility. Plato's response would be that the roles are not arbitrary assignments, but reflections of genuine natural differences. Some people are naturally philosophical. Some are naturally spirited and courageous. Some are naturally skilled with their hands or talented at commerce. Justice consists in recognizing these differences and organizing society accordingly. Whether we agree with this or not, the principle that justice has something to do with each person fulfilling their nature, doing what they are genuinely suited to do, remains powerful and thought-provoking. And the greatest injustice, Socrates says, is when someone from one class tries to move into another class for which they are not naturally suited. If a craftsman tries to become a guardian, or a guardian tries to become a ruler without the proper nature and training, this is the kind of meddling that destroys the city. The exchange of roles among the three classes is the greatest harm to the city and would most rightly be called injustice. Now Socrates turns from the city to the individual soul. Remember, the whole point of building the city in speech was to find justice writ large, so that they could then look for it in the individual. Socrates argues that the same three-part structure that exists in the city also exists in the soul of every person. The soul has a rational part, which loves wisdom and seeks truth. It corresponds to the rulers of the city. The soul has a spirited part, which is the source of anger, ambition, and the love of honor. It corresponds to the guardians. And the soul has an appetitive part, which is the source of bodily desires, hunger, thirst, sexual desire, and the love of money. It corresponds to the producers. Socrates offers several arguments for the existence of these three parts. The key argument relies on the principle of non-contradiction. The same thing cannot do opposite things at the same time, in the same respect, in relation to the same object. If a person is thirsty and yet refrains from drinking, something in them desires the drink, and something else refuses it. The desiring part is the appetite. The refusing part is reason. And since these two parts can conflict with each other, they must be genuinely different parts of the soul. But there is also a third element. Sometimes a person feels anger at their own desires. A person who is tempted to do something shameful might feel a surge of indignation, a spirited resistance to the pull of appetite. This spirit is not the same as reason, because it can exist in people and even in animals who do not have much reason. But it is not the same as appetite either, because it often opposes appetite. It is a distinct part of the soul, the spirited part, and it naturally allies itself with reason against the desires when it has been properly educated. Justice in the individual, then, is exactly analogous to justice in the city. It is the condition in which each part of the soul does its own work. Reason rules, spirit supports reason and enforces its commands, and appetite obeys. When the soul is structured in this way, the person is just. When the parts are disordered, when appetite rules, or when spirit acts on its own without the guidance of reason, the person is unjust. You may recognize this inner struggle from your own experience. There are moments when you know what the right thing to do is, your reason tells you clearly, but some appetite pulls you in the other direction. The desire for comfort, for pleasure, for the easy path. And then there is a third voice, a kind of inner indignation, a feeling of shame or pride that either supports your reason or, if miseducated, allies with your appetites. Plato is describing the inner life that every reflective person knows intimately. The question is simply which part is in charge. In the just person, reason leads. In the unjust person, the appetites lead, and the whole soul is in turmoil. Consider the person who knows they should study, but keeps reaching for their phone. The person who knows they should save money but keeps spending. The person who knows they should speak the truth but keeps hedging and evading. In each case, the rational part sees what is best, but the appetitive part wins. The soul is unjust, not in the sense of legal wrongdoing, but in the deeper Platonic sense of inner disorder. The parts are not doing their proper work. Reason has been overthrown and appetite sits on the throne. And injustice in the soul is like a disease. Just as health in the body is a matter of the organs and systems functioning in their natural order, with each doing its own work, so justice in the soul is a matter of the psychic parts functioning in their natural order. Justice is the health of the soul. Injustice is its disease. This is Socrates' answer to the challenge of Glaucon and Adeimantus, at least in outline. Justice is good for the soul in itself because it is the condition of psychic health and harmony. The just person's soul is ordered, unified, and at peace. The unjust person's soul is disordered, conflicted, and at war with itself. And just as no one would prefer to be physically sick, even if sickness came with wealth and honor, no one who understood the nature of the soul would prefer injustice, even if it came with all the external rewards in the world. The argument is not yet complete. Much remains to be worked out. But the basic framework is in place. Justice is harmony. Injustice is discord. And the just life is better than the unjust life because harmony is better than discord, health is better than sickness, order is better than chaos. If you are listening to this in the dark, perhaps on the edge of sleep, let this idea be the one you carry with you. Justice is the health of the soul. It is not a burden or a sacrifice or a constraint. It is the condition in which your soul functions as it was meant to. When reason leads, when your spirit supports what is right, when your desires are in their proper place, you are at peace. Not the peace of numbness or indifference, but the deep living peace of a soul that is whole. This is what Plato means by justice, and this is why it is good in itself, regardless of any external reward. A healthy body feels good, not because someone is paying it to feel good, but because health is its natural condition. A just soul is the same. It feels right because it is right, and no amount of wealth or fame given to an unjust soul can compensate for the inner disorder, the quiet suffering of a soul at war with itself. Book 5. The Three Waves. Book 5 is one of the most dramatic and controversial parts of the Republic. Just as Socrates is about to move on to discuss the different forms of unjust cities and unjust souls, his companions interrupt him and demand that he go back and explain something he had mentioned only briefly. He had said back when discussing the guardians that women and children would be held in common. What did he mean by this? His friends insist that he explain. Socrates is reluctant. He says he fears that what he is about to say will seem absurd and impossible. He compares himself to a man who is about to be drowned by three great waves, and so the proposals of Book 5 are traditionally called the Three Waves. The first wave is the proposal that women should share in all the same tasks as men, including the tasks of the guardians. In ancient Athens, this was a radical idea. Women were largely confined to the household. They had no political role, no military role, and little public life. Socrates argues that the difference between men and women is only a difference of body, not of soul. Women have the same range of natural capacities as men. Some women have philosophical natures, some have spirited natures, some are suited to crafts and trades. The relevant question is not what sex a person is, but what natural aptitude they have. Therefore, women with guardian natures should receive the same education as male guardians. They should train in gymnastics and music. They should learn the art of war. They should guard the city alongside the men. Socrates acknowledges that, on average, women may be physically weaker than men, and so they might be given lighter tasks. But the difference is one of degree, not of kind. There is no task related to the management of the city that belongs to a woman because she is a woman, or to a man because he is a man. This argument was extraordinary for its time. In the Athens of the 4th century BCE, women could not vote, could not own property in their own name, and were largely confined to the domestic sphere. For Socrates to say that women should receive the same education as men, should exercise naked alongside men in the gymnasium, as was the Greek custom, and should fight in battle as guardians, was genuinely shocking. Plato puts this forward knowing full well that his audience will find it laughable. Socrates himself says that the proposal will be met with waves of ridicule. But the logic of the argument demands it. If the relevant criterion for being a guardian is natural aptitude, not sex, then to exclude women from guardian roles simply because they are women would be an injustice, a case of the city failing to use its best resources. It is worth noting that this argument reappeared in various forms throughout the centuries, always controversial, always ahead of its time. When Mary Wollstonecraft wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Woman in 1792, she was making essentially the same argument that Plato made 22 centuries earlier. When John Stuart Mill argued for women's suffrage in the 19th century, the logic was the same. The idea that capacity, not gender, should determine social role is one of Plato's most enduring contributions, even though his own city never came close to implementing it.
Let that first wave settle in. It is a remarkable proposal, and one that continues to resonate. The idea that talent, not tradition, should determine social role. The idea that education should be tailored to the individual's nature, not their birth. These principles, however imperfectly realized, underlie many of the institutions and values we take for granted today. The second wave is even more radical. Socrates proposes that, among the guardian class, there should be no private families. The guardians will not marry in the traditional sense. Instead, the rulers will arrange unions between men and women at special festivals, using a rigged lottery to make it seem random, although in reality the rulers will be selecting pairs based on their qualities to produce the best possible offspring. Children born of these unions will be raised communally. They will not know who their biological parents are, and their parents will not know which children are theirs. Every guardian of the right age will regard every child as their own, and every child will regard every guardian of the right age as their parent. The result is that the guardian class will be like one enormous family. There will be no division between my children and your children, my interests and your interests. What affects one will affect all. The children who are deemed unhealthy or defective would, Socrates suggests, be quietly removed, though the text is deliberately vague about what this means. This is one of the most disturbing aspects of the Republic, and it has rightly been criticized. It reflects a harsh strain in ancient Greek thought about the treatment of the weak and imperfect that is deeply at odds with modern values. We should not soften or excuse it, but we should also not let it prevent us from engaging with the rest of the dialogue's insights. The purpose of this arrangement is to eliminate the private loyalties and rivalries that tear communities apart. When people care primarily about their own families, their own wealth, their own success, they inevitably come into conflict with one another. The community fragments into competing factions. But if the guardians have no private families and no private property, they have nothing to fight about. Their loyalty is to the city as a whole, not to any private interest. Socrates acknowledges that this is a vast departure from ordinary life. He is describing a community that would be utterly alien to most people's experience. But he argues that the benefits would be enormous. The unity and harmony of the guardian class would be unshakable. The city would function like a single organism, with every part working for the good of the whole. The third wave is the biggest and most important of all. Socrates says that none of these proposals can be realized unless one fundamental change is made. Philosophers must become kings, or kings must become philosophers, until political power and philosophical wisdom are united in the same person. Cities will never cease from their troubles. This is the famous doctrine of the philosopher king. It is the claim that the only people who are fit to rule are those who genuinely understand reality, who have knowledge of the good, who can see beyond appearances to the truth of things. Ordinary politicians are like blind men. They grope and stumble, driven by ambition, appetite, and opinion. But the philosopher who has seen the truth, who has ascended from the cave into the sunlight, is the only one who can guide the city toward genuine well-being. This idea has been debated for more than 2,000 years, and opinions about it vary wildly. Some see it as the noblest aspiration of political philosophy, the dream that the wisest and most virtuous should lead. Others see it as the most dangerous, a recipe for authoritarianism dressed up in the language of wisdom. Who decides who the philosophers are? Who guards the guardians? These are real and serious objections. But it is worth understanding why Plato thought this idea was necessary. He had watched Athenian democracy condemn his teacher to death. He had seen demagogues lead the city into catastrophic military adventures. He had witnessed the rule of the 30 tyrants, a brutal oligarchy that included members of his own family. Every form of government he had experienced had failed. And it had failed, he believed, because the people in charge did not truly understand what they were doing. They were navigating by opinion, not by knowledge. And the result was disaster. The philosopher king is Plato's answer to this problem. It is not a claim that any philosopher should be given power. It is a claim that the only legitimate form of power is power guided by genuine understanding. And genuine understanding for Plato means knowledge of the good, knowledge of what truly matters, knowledge that is not distorted by personal ambition or factional interest or popular prejudice. Socrates knows that this claim will be met with ridicule. Most people think of philosophers as useless dreamers, if not outright dangerous eccentrics. And Socrates admits that in actually existing cities, philosophers often are useless, not because there is anything wrong with philosophy, but because the cities are badly governed and have no use for wisdom.
It is like a ship on which the crew has mutinied. The true navigator, the one who actually knows how to steer by the stars, is shoved aside by sailors who think that navigation requires no special skill, that anyone can do it, and that the navigator is just gazing at the sky pointlessly. The philosopher is useless in a corrupt city, just as the navigator is useless on a mutinous ship. But this does not mean that philosophy is useless, it means that the city is sick. Socrates also explains why so many people who start out with philosophical natures end up becoming corrupt. A great nature, if it is not properly educated, produces great harm. The qualities that make a person suited for philosophy, intelligence, courage, passion, breadth of vision, are the very same qualities that, if misdirected, produce the most dangerous tyrants and demagogues. The corruption of the best is the worst of all corruptions. In a society that does not value philosophy, the genuinely philosophical soul is like a rare plant growing in alien soil. It withers, or it is distorted into something monstrous. The flatterers and sophists gather around it, telling it how great it is, diverting it from the pursuit of truth toward the pursuit of power. Only a few, by some lucky accident, escape this fate and remain true to philosophy. And they survive only by keeping quiet and staying out of public life, like a man sheltering behind a wall in a storm of dust and rain. For the ideal city to come into being, there must be some circumstance in which a true philosopher ends up in a position of power. This might seem almost impossible, but Socrates insists that it is not impossible, only difficult, and it is necessary. Without philosophical rule, justice in the full sense can never be achieved. There is a melancholy in this part of the Republic. Socrates is describing an ideal that he knows may never be realized. The philosopher who has seen the good does not want to rule. The people who want to rule have not seen the good. The gap between wisdom and power seems almost unbridgeable. And yet Socrates insists on the ideal, because without it, there is no standard by which to judge existing cities, no vision of what human community could be at its best. The ideal city may exist only in speech, only in thought, but the person who carries that ideal in their soul is transformed by it. They see the world differently, they act differently, they are, in a sense, already citizens of that city, even if it has never existed on Earth. Socrates says something beautiful near the end of this discussion. He says that it does not matter whether the ideal city exists anywhere on Earth. The person who has understood it can found it within themselves. They can live as a citizen of the good city, governing their own soul according to its principles, regardless of what happens in the external world. The ideal city is, in the end, a city of the soul. Book 6. The Divided Line and the Idea of the Good Book. 6 continues the discussion of the philosopher and attempts to describe what philosophers actually know that makes them fit to rule. This is where the Republic reaches its most abstract and metaphysical heights. Socrates argues that the true philosopher is a lover of all truth, not just some truths. The philosopher does not pick and choose which realities to accept. Rather, the philosopher loves reality itself, in all its forms, and is never satisfied with mere appearances or opinions. The philosopher seeks to know things as they truly are. But what is it ultimately that the philosopher knows? Socrates says that the greatest object of knowledge is the idea of the good. The good is not just one form among others, it is the highest reality, the source and ground of everything else. Just as the sun in the visible world gives light, makes things visible, and makes growth and life possible, so the good in the intelligible world gives truth, makes things knowable, and gives being and reality to everything that exists. This analogy of the sun is one of the most famous passages in all of philosophy. Socrates draws a parallel between the sun and the good. The sun is not sight, but it is the cause of sight. It is not the things we see, but it is what makes them seeable. Similarly, the good is not knowledge, but it is the cause of knowledge. It is not truth, but it is what makes truth possible. And just as the sun also gives things their growth and nourishment and existence, even though the sun itself is not existence, so the good gives things their being and their reality, even though the good itself is beyond being, transcending it in dignity and power. This is an astonishing claim. The good is beyond being. It is the source of all reality, but it is not itself just another thing in reality. It transcends everything. This idea has had an enormous influence on the history of Western philosophy and theology. The Neoplatonists, the Christian mystics, the Islamic philosophers, all of them drew on this passage in one way or another. The idea of a supreme principle that is beyond all description, beyond all categories, the source of everything, but identical with nothing. This is one of the deepest and most mysterious ideas in human thought. Let it wash over you for a moment. There is something at the very heart of reality that makes everything else real, that makes everything else knowable, that makes everything else good. You cannot see it directly, just as you cannot stare at the sun without going blind. But you can see its effects everywhere. Every time you recognize that something is true, every time you perceive that something is beautiful, every time you sense that something is right, you are experiencing the influence of the good. It is the light by which all other things become visible. It is the warmth that makes all other things grow. And although you may never grasp it fully, the attempt to move toward it, the longing to understand it, is the highest activity of the human soul. Socrates is careful to say that he is offering images and analogies, not a direct account. The good itself cannot be captured in words. It can only be approached through a long process of philosophical training that culminates in a kind of direct intellectual vision. This is not mysticism in the sense of vague feeling or subjective experience. It is the result of rigorous, disciplined thinking carried to its ultimate conclusion. But it shares with mysticism the conviction that the deepest truths cannot be fully expressed in language, that at some point the seeker must go beyond words and concepts to a direct encounter with reality itself. Socrates admits that he cannot give a full account of the good itself. He calls what he can offer the child of the good, an offspring or image, rather than the thing itself. This modesty is important. Even Plato, even through the mouth of his wisest character, does not claim to have fully grasped the ultimate principle of reality. The good remains, in some fundamental sense, beyond the reach of human language and human thought. It can be pointed toward, gestured at, approached through analogy and image, but it cannot be captured in a formula or a definition. This is not a failure of philosophy. It is a recognition of the depth of reality itself. The most important things are also the most difficult to articulate. Instead, Socrates offers analogies and images. The analogy of the sun is one, and the divided line is another. The divided line is a diagram of the different levels of reality and the corresponding levels of knowledge. Imagine a line divided into two unequal parts. The lower part represents the visible world, the world of physical things that we perceive with our senses. The upper part represents the intelligible world, the world of forms and ideas that we grasp with our minds. Now divide each of these two parts again. The lower section of the visible world consists of shadows, reflections, and images. Our relation to these is mere imagination or conjecture. We see the shadow on the wall, but do not see the thing that casts it. The upper section of the visible world consists of the actual physical objects, animals, plants, and manufactured things. Our relation to these is belief or common sense. We see the things themselves, but we do not understand them at a deep level.